Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to Thursday the 14th of January 2021. Today we are continuing our work about Cherry in the Giant's Necklace, and we're going to be writing in role as Cherry. Not as long a write as yesterday, just a short note, but that's what we're going to be working towards today. So remember that we asked you to have your brainstorms ready for the lesson today. So pause the video if you need to grab it. Now, have a look at your brainstorm, which you started on Monday, about Cherry. Is there anything else which you found out which you want to add? You might want to pause the slides and think back over the story so far. Okay, so when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that I might want to put something about her being quite trustworthy on my brainstorm because her parents are happy to leave her on the beach to collect more shells, which would suggest that they think she's quite trustworthy and reliable. You might have found some other things that you're going to add. Now, thinking about that necklace, we know it's incredibly precious to Cherry, and we're going to read the next part of the story and see what happens. So this was the last part we read yesterday. I wonder if you can have a little think about what might happen next and why you think so. This is where we left it yesterday. She turned and looked behind to see how far away the next wave was, just to reassure herself that she had enough time. But the great surge of green water was on her before she could register either disappointment or fear. She was hurled back against the rock below her and covered at once by the sea. She was conscious as she went down that she was drowning, but she still clutched her shells against her chest and hoped she had enough of them at last to finish the giant's necklace. Those were her last thoughts before the sea took her away. So, have a little think, pause the video. What do you think might happen next in this story? Try and explain your thinking, like we'd ask you to do if you were in class. So, I'm going to read the next part. Cherry lay on her side where the tide had lifted her and coughed until her lungs were clear. She woke as the sea came in once again and frothed around her legs. She rolled on her back, feeling the salt spray on her face, and saw that it was night. The sky above her was dashed with stars, and the moon rode through the clouds. She scrambled to her feet, one hand still holding her precious shells close to her. Instinctively, she backed away from the sea and looked around her. With growing dismay, she found she had been thrown back on the wrong side of the rocks, that she was not in Boat Cove. The tide had left only a few feet of sand and rock between her and the cliff face. There was no way back through the sea to safety. She turned round to face the cliff that she realised now would be her last hope. For she remembered that this little beach vanished completely at high tide. If she stayed where she was, she would surely be swept away again, and this time she might not be so fortunate. But the cold seemed to have calmed her, and she reasoned more deliberately now, wondering why she had not tried to climb the cliff before. She had hurried into her first attempt to escape, and it had very nearly cost her her life. She would wait this time until the sea forced her up the cliff. Perhaps the tide would not come in that far. Perhaps they'd be looking for her by now. It was dark. Surely they would be searching. Surely they must find her soon. After all, they knew where she was. Yes, she thought, best just to wait and hope. She settled down on a ledge of rock that was the first step up on the cliff face, drew up her knees to her chin to keep out the chill, and waited. She watched as the sea crept ever closer, each wave lashing her with spray and eating away gradually at the beach. She closed her eyes and prayed, hoping against hope that when she opened them, the sea would be retreating. But her prayers went unanswered, and the sea came in to cover the beach. Once or twice she thought she heard voices above her on the cliff path, but when she called out, no one came. She continued to shout for help every few minutes, forgetting it was futile against the continuous roar and hiss of the waves. A pair of raucous white gulls flew down from the cliffs to investigate her, and she called to them for help, but they did not seem to understand and wheeled away into the night. Cherry stayed sitting on her rock until the waves threatened to dislodge her, and then, reluctantly, she began her climb. She would go as far as she needed to and no further. She had scanned the first few feet above the foothold, and it did look quite a simple climb to begin with, and so it proved. But her hands were numbed with cold and her legs began to tremble with the strain almost at once. She could see that the ledge she had now reached was the last deep one visible on the cliff face. The shells in her sweater were restricting her freedom of movement, so she decided she would leave them there. Wrapped tight in the towel, they would be quite safe. She took the soaking bundle out of her sweater and placed it carefully against the rock face on the ledge, pushing it in as far as it would go. "I'll be back for you," she said, and reached up for the next lip of rock. Just below her, the sea crashed against the cliff as if it wanted to suck her from the rock face and claim her once again. Cherry determined not to look down, but to concentrate on the climb. At first, she imagined the glow above her was from a torch. She shouted and screamed until she was weak from the effort of it. But although no answering call came from the night, the light remained pale and beckoning, wider than that of a torch. With renewed hope, Cherry found enough strength to inch her way up the cliff until she reached the entrance to a narrow cave. It was filled with flickering yellow light, like that of a candle shaken by the wind. She hauled herself up into the mouth of the cave and sat down, exhausted. Looking back down at the furious sea frothing beneath her, she laughed aloud in triumph. She was safe. She had defied the sea and won. Her one regret was that she had decided that she had had to leave her cowrie shells behind. She would fetch them tomorrow after the tide had gone down again. And for the first time now, she began to think of her family and how worried they would be. But the thought of walking in through the front door, all dripping and dramatic, made her almost choke with excitement. Okay, so we've got to that next section. Now, did any of Cherry's actions surprise you? Anything that Cherry did? Did you think it was out of character or you weren't expecting it? Pause the videos and maybe have a little think and a chat if there's somebody near you or if you're chatting to people on the phone or by text message. Okay, like me, you might be surprised that she left her shells on the ledge because she'd been collecting them for the entire holiday, and we know how precious they were to her. So let's have another little look at this section. Now you can see here I've underlined part of it, and I want us to look at these questions. How is Cherry feeling? Why does she leave the shells on the ledge? And how does she leave them on the ledge? So we will just read through that green part and see if you can think about some answers to those questions. Cherry stayed sitting on her rock until the waves threatened to dislodge her, and then reluctantly she began her climb. She would go as far as she needed and no further. She had scanned the first few feet above the footholds, and it did look quite simple a climb to begin with, and so it proved. But her hands were numbed with cold, and her legs began to tremble with the strain almost at once. She could see that the ledge she had now reached was the last deep one visible on the cliff face. The shells in her sweater were restricting her freedom of movement, so she decided she would leave them there. Wrapped tight in the towel, they would be quite safe. She took the soaking bundle out of her sweater and placed it carefully against the rock face on the ledge beside her, pushing it in as far as it would go. "I'll be back for you," she said, and reached up to the next lip of rock. Just below her, the sea crashed against the cliff as if it wanted to suck her from the rock face and claim her once again. Cherry determined not to look down, but to concentrate on the climb. Okay, so you might want to pause the video and answer those questions or have a think about them. How is Cherry feeling? Why does she leave the shells on the ledge? And how does she leave them on the ledge? So I'll let you have a little think about that for a few moments. Okay, so let's have a little think. How is Cherry feeling? I think we can tell from reading this that she's becoming very tired. So if we look in this part, her hands are getting numb with cold, her legs are trembling because of all the effort it's taking to climb up this cliff. And she's very wet as well. She's very wet and cold. So I think she's probably feeling very tired, very exhausted, and she just wants to get home. You might have other ideas. Why does she leave the shells on the ledge? Like I said earlier, we're very surprised that she leaves those shells because we know how precious they are. We know how desperate she is to finish this giant's necklace. However, in this section, it says the shells in her sweater were restricting her freedom of movement. Now that means that she was finding it difficult to climb the cliff with those shells. So I think that rather than take the shells with her and maybe not get to safety, she decided she needed to leave them in a safe place. Also, she might have been worried that she was going to break the shells. So I think there could be two reasons why she leaves those shells on that ledge. And finally, how does she leave them? Well, if we look up at this section, we know that she places them, she's got them bundled up, they're wrapped up in a towel, and she places them carefully against the rock face, but she pushes them back into a little ledge to keep them safe, to make sure the wind doesn't blow them away. So again, even though Cherry is leaving those shells, we know that she's done her best to leave them in a place which is safe, where they're not going to get washed away or blown away, because again, she is determined to come back and to get that necklace finished. So I wonder whether you agree with my ideas or whether you had some different ideas. So today we are going to imagine that we are Cherry, and you're going to leave a note with your shells. Okay, so think about, what would you want to write in it? What do you think Cherry would write in a note that she left with those shells? So we've got two notes on the next pages. So we're going to do a spot the difference, which we've done before in class. We're going to think about what we know about Cherry. Now, I want you to focus on what is the difference between the two notes and which one do you think Cherry might have written and why? Thinking about what we know about Cherry so far. So all of those ideas that you've got on your brainstorm and the type of person that we think she is, which note do you think may have been written by Cherry and why? So here are the two examples. You can pause the video or you can listen to me read them, or you can print them off the website, whichever you'd prefer. To whoever finds this note, please, please look after these precious shells. They mean everything to me and have taken all holiday to collect. I've escaped from the sea and just can't carry them anymore. I'm exhausted. Please take them to Granite Cottage, and if I'm not there, tell my parents I'll be in the old mine. Whatever happens, keep them safe. Love, Cherry. This is version 2. Look after my shells, or be very sorry. I need them to make my necklace. If you break or lose them, you'll have to replace them. Take them immediately to Granite Cottage and give them to my parents or brothers. Be careful and don't be tempted to keep them. They're mine. Okay, so like I said, pause the video or look at them more closely if you've printed them off from the website, and see if you can think, which one do you think, knowing Cherry from what we've found out about her in the story, which one do you think she would have written and why? If you want a challenge, explain why you don't think she'd have written the other one. Okay, and we'll look at them together in a moment. Okay, so we're going to look at this one first. Now, hopefully, when you read this note, you noticed that it sounded a bit too rude to be the type of note that Cherry might write. Although she's determined, she loves her shells and is protective over them, she never seems like she'd be deliberately rude. However, one positive is that it's properly punctuated, which is a big positive. Now, in this note, we still understand that the shells are precious to Cherry and that she wants them to be looked after, but it is written in a way which reflects Cherry's determined character without appearing rude. And this one also contains a variety of punctuation. Now it's your turn to write a note in the style of Cherry. You can use a crumpled up piece of paper if it helps you get into role, and imagine you are Cherry on the side of a cliff. It should only be a short note. And I want you to think about how will you communicate the type of character she is. Even though it is a short note, it should still be perfectly punctuated and each word should be carefully selected. So pause the video whilst you write your note. It's probably going to take you between 10 and 15 minutes. Okay, so if you can, read your note to someone else. You might want to phone up one of your friends and read it down the phone to them. Before you read it, ask them these questions. What impression do you get of Cherry and how do you think she is feeling? Now, sit back, listen to the next part of the story before we end the lesson and think about whether it is what you expect. As she reached forward to brush a sharp stone from the sole of her foot, Cherry noticed that the narrow entrance to the cave was half sealed in. She ran her fingers over the stones and cement to make sure, for the light was poor, and it was at that moment she recognised exactly where she was. She recalled now the giant fledgling cuckoo one of her brothers had spotted being fed by a tiny rock pipit earlier in the holidays, how they had quarrelled over the binoculars and how, when she had finally usurped them and made her escape across the rocks, she had found the cuckoo perched at the entrance to a narrow cave some way up the cliff face from the beach. She had asked about the man-made walling and her father had told her of the tin mines whose lodes and adits crisscrossed the entire coastal area around Zennor. This one, he said, might have been the mine they called Wheel North Grills, and he thought the adit must have been walled up to prevent the seas from entering the mine in the storm. It was said there had been an accident in the mine only a few years after it was opened, over 100 years before, and that the mine had had to close soon after when the mine owners ran out of money to make the necessary repairs. The entire story came back to her now, and she wondered where the cookie was and whether the rock pipit had died with the effort of keeping the fledgling alive. Tin mines, she thought, lead to the surface and the way home. The thought and her natural inquisitiveness about the source of light persuaded her to her feet and into the tunnel. The adit became narrower and lower as she crept forward, so that she had to go down on her hands and knees and sometimes flat on her stomach. Although she was out of the wind now, it seemed colder. She felt she was moving downwards for a minute or two. The blood was coming to her head and her weight was heavy on her hands. Then quite suddenly she found the ground levelling out and saw a large tunnel ahead of her. There was no doubt as to which way she should turn, for one way the tunnel was black and the other way was lighted with candles that lined the load wall as far as she could see. And she called out, "Anyone there? Anyone there?" She paused to listen for the reply, but all she could hear now was the muffled roar of the sea and the continuous echoing of dripping water. The tunnel widened now, and she found that she could walk upright again, but her feet hurt against the stone, and so she moved slowly, feeling her way gently with each foot. She had only gone a short distance when she heard tapping for the first time, distinct and rhythmic, a sound that was instantly recognisable as hammering. It became sharper and noticeably more metallic as she moved up the tunnel. She could hear the distant murmur of voices and the sound of falling stone. Even before she came out of the tunnel and into the vast cave, she knew what she had happened upon a working mine. The cave was dark in all but one corner, and here she could see two men bending to their work, their backs towards her. One of them was inspecting the rock face closely, whilst the other swung his hammer with controlled power, pausing only to spit on his hands from time to time. They wore round hats with turned-up brims that also served as candlesticks, for a lighted candle was fixed to each one. The light danced with the shadows along the cave walls as they worked. Cherry watched for some moments until she made up her mind what to do. She longed to rush up to them and tell of her escape and to ask them to take her to the surface, but a certain shyness overcame her and she held back. Her chance to interrupt came when they sat down against the rock face and opened their canteens. She was in the shadows and they could still not see her. "Tea looks cold again," one of them said gruffly. "'Tis always cold. I'm sure she makes it with cold water." "Oh, stop your moaning, father," said the other, a younger voice Cherry felt. "She does her best. She's 5 little ones to look after and precious little to do it on. She does her best. You mustn't keep on at her so. It upsets her. She does her best." "Ah, so she does, lad, so she does. And so for that matter do I. But that don't stop her moaning at me, and it'll not stop me moaning at her. If we didn't moan at each other, lad, we'd have precious else to talk about, and that's a fact. She expects it of me, lad, and I expects it of her." "Excuse me," Cherry said tentatively. She felt if she had eavesdropped for long enough. She approached them slowly. "Excuse me, but I've got a bit lost. I climbed the cliff, you see, because I was cut off from the cove, and I was trying to get back, and I couldn't, and I saw this light, and so I climbed up. And I want to get home, and I wondered if you could help me get to the top." "Top?" said the older one, peering into the dark. "Come closer, lad, where we can see you." "She's not a lad, father. Are you blind? Can you not see? 'Tis a filly. 'Tis a young filly all wet through from the sea. Come," the young man said, standing up and beckoning Cherry in. "Don't be afeard, little girl. We shan't harm you. Come on, you can have some of my tea if you like." They spoke their words in a manner Cherry had never heard before. It was not the usual Cornish burr, but heavier and rougher in tone, more old-fashioned somehow. There were so many questions in her mind. "But I thought the mine was closed 100 years ago," she said nervously. "That's what I was told anyway." "Well, you was told wrong," said the old man, whom Cherry could see more clearly now under his candle. His eyes were white and set far back in his head, unnaturally so, she thought, and his lips and mouth seemed a vivid red in the candlelight. "Closed? They look closed indeed. Does it look closed to you? Do you think we're digging for worms? Over 4,000 tons of tin last year and 9,000 of copper ore. And you ask, is the mine closed? Over 20 fathoms below the sea this mine goes. We'll dig right out under the ocean halfway to America before we close down this mine." He spoke passionately now, almost angrily, so that Cherry felt she'd offended him. "Hush, father," said the young man, taking off his jacket and wrapping it round Cherry's shoulders. "She doesn't want to hear all about that. She's cold and wet, can't you see? Now, let's make a little fire to warm her through. She's shivered right through to the bones. You can see she is." "Oh, they all are," said the old tinner, pulling himself to his feet. "They all are." And he shuffled past her into the dark. "I'll fetch the wood," he muttered, and then added, "for all the good it'll do." "What does he mean?" Cherry asked the young man, for whom she felt an instant liking. "What did he mean by that?" "Oh, pay him no heed, little girl," he said. "He's an old man now and tired of the mine. We're both tired of it, but we're proud of it, see? And we've nowhere else to go. Nothing else to do." He had a kind voice that was reassuring to Cherry. He seemed to know the questions she wanted to ask, for he answered them now without her even asking them. "Sit down by me while you listen, girl," he said. Father will make a fire to warm you, and I shall tell you how we come to be here. You won't be afeard now, will you?" Cherry looked up into his face, which was younger than she had expected from his voice, but like his father's, the eyes seemed sad and deep-set. Yet they smiled at her gently, and she smiled back. "That's my girl. It was a new mine, this, promising, everyone said. Best tin in Cornwall, and that means the best tin in the world. 1865 it started up, and they were looking for tinners, and so father found a cottage down by Treville and came to work here. I was already 14, so I joined him down the mine, and we prospered, and the mine prospered, to start with. Mother and the little children had full bellies, and there was talk of sinking a fresh shaft. Times were good and promised to get better." Cherry sat transfixed as the story of the disaster unfolded. She heard about how they'd been trapped by a fall of rock, about how they had worked to pull them away, but behind every rock was another rock and another rock. And she heard how they had never heard any sound of rescue. They had died, he said, in 2 days or so because the air was bad and there was too little of it. Father's never accepted it. He still thinks he's alive, that he goes home to mother and the little children each evening. But he's dead, just like me. I can't tell him though, for he'd not understand, and it would break his heart if he ever knew. So you aren't real? I'm just imagining all this. You're just a dream. No dream, my girl, said the young man, laughing out loud. No more, and we're imagining you. We're real enough, all right. But we're dead and have been for hundreds of years or more. Ghost spirits, that's what living folk call us. Come to think of it, that's what I called us when I was alive. Cherry was on her feet, suddenly backing away. No need to be afeard, little girl, said the young man, holding out his hand towards her. We won't harm you. No one can harm you, not now. Look, he started the fire already. Come over, warm yourself. Come on, it'll be all right, girl. We'll look after you. We'll help you. But I want to go home, Cherry said, feeling the panic rising to her voice and trying to control it. I know you're kind, but I want to go home. My mother will be worried about me. They'll be out looking for me. Your light saved my life, and I want to thank you, but I must go, else they'll worry themselves sick. I know they will. You going back home? The young man asked, and then he nodded. I suppose you'll want to see your family again. Of course I am, said Cherry, perplexed by the question. Of course I do. 'Tis a pity, he said sadly. Everyone passes through and no one stays. They all want to go home, but then so do I. You'll want me to guide you to the surface, I suppose. I'm not the first then, Cherry said. There's been others climb up to the mine to escape from the sea. You saved lots of people. A few, said the tinner, nodding. A few. You're a kind person, Cherry said, warming to the sadness in the young man's voice. I never thought ghosts would be kind. Oh, we're just people. People who've passed on, replied the young man, taking her elbow and leading her towards the fire. There's nice people and there's nasty people. It's the same if you're alive or if you're dead. You're a nice person. I can tell that, even though I haven't known you for long. I'm sad because I should like to be alive again with my friends and go rabbiting or blackberrying up by the chapel near Treville like I used to. The sun always seemed to be shining then. After it happened, I used to go up to the surface and move amongst the people in the village. I went often to see my family, but if I spoke to them, they never seemed to hear me. And of course, they can't see you. You can see them, but they can't see you. That's the worst of it. So I don't go up much now, just to collect wood for the fire and a bit of food now and then. I stay down here with Father in the mine and work away day after day. And from time to time, someone like you comes up the tunnel from the sea and lightens our darkness. I'll be sad when you go. The old man was hunched over the fire, rubbing his hands and holding them out over the heat. Not often we have a fire, he said, his voice more sprightly now. Only on special occasions, birthdays, of course. We always have a fire back at the cottage. Martha's next. You don't know her. She's my only daughter. She'll be 8 on September the 10th. She's been poorly, you know, her lungs. That's what the doctor says. He sighed deeply. 'Tis dreadful damp in the cottage. 'Tis well nigh impossible to keep it out. There was a tremor in the old man's voice that betrayed his emotion. He looked up at Cherry, and she could see the tears in his eyes. She looks a bit like you, my dear, raven-haired and pretty as a picture, but not so tall, not so tall. Come closer, you'll be warmer that way. Cherry sat with them by the fire till it died away to nothing. She longed to go home, to get home amongst the living. But the old man talked on of his family and their little one-room cottage with a ladder to the bedroom where they all huddled together for warmth, of his friends that used to meet in the Tinner's Arms every evening, and there were tales of wrecking and smuggling, and all the while the young man sat silent until there was a lull in the story. Father, he said, I think our little friend would like to go home now. Shall I take her up as I usually do? The old man nodded and waved his hand in dismissal. Come back and see us sometime if you've a mind to, he said, and then put his face in his hand. Goodbye, Cherry said. Thank you for the fire and for helping me. I won't forget you. But the old man never replied. Okay, so that is the next section of the story. So she has escaped from the sea and climbed up the cliff and discovered these men who used to work in the mine and are now ghosts and are staying in the mine. They used to live near it. And they talked to Cherry about their lives, and now they're going to take her back up to the surface. So Take care. Come back tomorrow to hear the rest of the story, and we will be looking back and reflecting on what the author did within the story. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed listening to the rest of that today, and have a good evening, and we will see you tomorrow morning.